Did you know that some of the most resourceful and affordable meals come from ancient traditions? Indigenous tribes have been surviving for centuries on meals that are not only cheap, but packed with nutrition. From the forests to the deserts, here are 20 meals that Indigenous tribes ate to survive. First, acorn mush. Long before supermarkets lined our streets, Native American tribes across North America turned to the humble acorn as a daily staple. These little nuts, dropping freely from oak trees each fall, became the backbone of many tribal diets. Families would gather together during harvest season, collecting basketfuls of acorns that could feed them through lean winter months. But acorns straight from the tree hide a bitter secret. They're packed with tannins that make them too harsh to eat. The clever solution? People would crack open the nuts, grind them into meal, and then carefully wash this powder in running water for days until the bitterness disappeared. Sometimes they would dig shallow pits by streams where the water could do the work, or place the ground acorns in special baskets in rivers. Once the tannins washed away, the acorn meal turned sweet and nutty. With their bitter bite removed, the acorns transformed into a creamy, filling mush when cooked with water over hot stones or fire. This wasn't just any porridge. It was packed with healthy fats, fibre and energy that kept hunger at bay for hours. Tribes often mixed in berries, nuts or honey when available, turning this daily food into something special. 2. Three Sisters. Stew. The Three Sisters, corn, beans and squash, might be the most brilliant food system ever created by Native Americans. These three plants weren't just grown near each other by chance. They formed a perfect team in the soil. Tall corn stalks reached for the sky, providing natural poles for climbing beans, while the beans gave back by fixing nitrogen in the soil. Sprawling squash plants with their broad leaves covered the ground below, keeping weeds away and moisture in. This clever planting method turned into an equally clever meal, Three Sisters stew. Tribes would combine these garden companions in a clay pot over fire, creating a meal where each sister brought something special to the table: corn's sweet energy, beans filling protein, and squash's rich vitamins. The beauty of Three Sisters stew was in its flexibility. In good times, tribes might add wild onions, sunflower seeds, or meat when available. During leaner seasons, the basic three ingredients could sustain families on their own. The stew bubbled slowly over community fires, thickening as the corn broke down, creating a hearty meal that stuck to your ribs and kept you going through long days of hunting or farming. Different tribes had their own special touches. Some added spicy wild peppers, others flavoured with maple sap or bear fat. 3. Fry bread. Fry bread tells a bittersweet story of Native American resilience during dark times. Unlike ancient indigenous foods, this golden, puffy bread was born from tragedy in the 1980s, when many tribes were forced from their homelands onto reservations. Government rations of white flour, sugar, salt and lard, foods completely foreign to traditional diets, were all many families had to survive. From these unfamiliar ingredients, Native American women created something new. Simple dough stretched into flat circles and dropped into hot oil, puffing up into pillowy bread that could fill empty stomachs quickly. The crackling sound of dough hitting hot oil became a sound of survival in difficult times. Today, fry bread appears at powwows and gatherings across North America, topped with everything from honey to ground beef and beans. Its golden crust breaks open to reveal a soft, chewy inside that's both comforting and filling. While not nutritionally ideal, fry bread represents how Indigenous people adapted and survived when their traditional food sources were taken away. 4th, cattail root soup. Hiding in plain sight along countless lakes, ponds and marshy areas across North America was one of the most reliable wild foods for Indigenous tribes, the common cattail. Those tall plants with their distinctive brown hot dog on a stick tops weren't just nice to look at, they were walking grocery stores. The secret lay beneath the muddy water, where cattails anchored themselves with thick, starchy roots that could be harvested year-round, even when snow covered the ground. Children would help adults wade into shallow water, carefully digging up these underwater treasures. Once cleaned of mud, the white inner cores of these roots, tender and slightly sweet, became the base for a hearty soup that could feed many hungry mouths. Cattail root soup simmered over open fires in clay or wooden vessels, often mixed with whatever else nature provided that season: wild onions in spring, berries in summer, or dried meat in winter. The roots released their starch into the broth, creating a naturally thick soup that warmed bellies on cold days. Some tribes added heated rocks directly to their cooking vessels to maintain the perfect simmer. Beyond the roots, clever hands also collected cattail pollen for bread, young shoots for fresh vegetables, and even the fluffy seed heads for diaper material and wound dressing. One plant provided food, medicine, and materials, a complete survival package disguised as an ordinary marsh plant. 5. Wild rice and fish. In the Shimmering Lakes region of what's now Minnesota and Wisconsin, the Ojibwe people harvested a food so special they called it manumin, the good berry. Wild rice isn't actually rice at all, but rather tall watergrass that produces protein-rich grain each fall. Harvesting was a careful dance between humans and nature. Pairs would guide canoes through rice beds, with one person gently bending the stalks over, while another tapped them with special sticks, knocking only the ripe seeds into the boat. This method ensured some seeds fell back into the water, replanting next year's crop. Sustainable harvesting at its finest. Back on shore, the green seeds would be dried, the husks removed through a special dance where people wore moccasins to step on them. And finally, the dark, nutty grains were ready. This wild rice became the perfect partner for the fish that swam in the same waters. Fresh-caught walleye, trout or perch would be cooked over open flames or hot stones, then served alongside the earthy grains. The combo provided complete protein, healthy fats, and slow-burning carbohydrates that sustained people through harsh northern winters. Fish bones went back to the water, rice hulls back to the soil, nothing wasted in this ancient food system. The flavour pairing was perfect too. The rich, smoky fish complemented the nutty, almost tea-like taste of the wild rice. This meal connected the Ojibwe to both water and land, embodying their understanding that good food comes from honouring and protecting these sources. Even today, manumin remains sacred, harvested in much the same way, though modern threats like water pollution and climate change put pressure on this ancient food relationship. 6th, saguaro, cactus, fruit jam. In the scorching Sonoran Desert, where summer temperatures regularly climb above 100 degrees, the towering saguaro cactus offered the tohono o Adam people a sweet reward for those who knew its secrets. Each summer, beautiful white flowers bloomed atop these giant plants, later developing into bright red fruits that ripened just as water became most scarce. Harvesting these treasures was no simple task. They grew up to 50 feet above the desert floor. Resourceful people fashioned long poles from lightweight desert woods, attaching crosses at the top to knock down the ripe fruits. The real magic happened next. When cracked open, each fruit revealed a vibrant red interior filled with tiny black seeds swimming in sweet, juicy pulp. Nature's candy in the desert. This precious fruit wouldn't last long in the desert heat, so families worked quickly to transform it into something that could sustain them longer. They separated the seeds and pulp, then boiled the bright red flesh over fires until it thickened into a sticky, intensely sweet jam. The process wasn't just about preservation. The cooking concentrated both the sweetness and the nutrients, creating a calorie-dense treat perfect for desert living. This syrupy jam could be spread on other foods, mixed with water for a refreshing drink, or eaten by the spoonful for quick energy. The countless tiny seeds weren't wasted either. Ground into meal, they added protein to the diet. 7. Pemmican. When plains tribes like the Lakota, Blackfoot and Cree needed food they could carry for months without spoiling, they created pemmican, perhaps the original energy bar. This super concentrated survival food began with large amounts of bison or deer meat, sliced paper thin and dried completely in the sun, or over slow smoke until it became brittle. Women would pound this dried meat with stone tools until it broke down into fine shreds or powder. Hard work that transformed tough protein into something more digestible. The real preservation magic happened next. Rendered animal fat was melted and mixed with the meat, creating a shelf-stable combination that could last for years without refrigeration. Many groups added dried berries like chokecherries, saskatoons or blueberries, which provided both flavour and crucial vitamins. Pemmican's greatest strength was its incredible portability and energy density. A small leather pouch could contain enough calories to sustain a hunter or warrior for days. During buffalo hunts, long journeys or harsh winters, when fresh food was scarce, this reliable staple kept people going. Each tribe had their own special recipe. Some preferred more berries, others added specific herbs or bone marrow for extra nutrition. The finished pemmican could be eaten as is, sliced and fried, or dropped into hot water to create a quick soup. When European fur traders encountered this indigenous invention, they quickly recognized its value for their own long expeditions, trading eagerly for it, and eventually learning to make their own versions. 8. Turtle stew. When rivers and lakes thawed after long winters, many woodland tribes across eastern North America welcomed the return of an unusual but treasured food source: turtles. These slow-moving creatures weren't just easy to catch, they represented a walking package of valuable nutrition. Harvesting was typically done with respect and careful timing, never taking too many from one area. The meat, different in texture and flavour, depending on whether it came from the legs, tail or body, was remarkably versatile. The real magic happened when cooks placed chunks of turtle meat into clay pots with wild onions, roots like sunchokes or arrowhead, and whatever greens the spring forest offered. Water added to this mix created a rich stew that simmered for hours until the meat became tender and the flavours melded together. Turtle stew earned its place as a celebration food in many communities, often marking the return of warmer weather or successful hunting seasons. Nothing went to waste in this traditional preparation. Even the turtle's blood might be added to enrich the broth, while the shells were cleaned and dried for use as bowls, tools, or ceremonial rattles. The long, slow cooking process allowed families to gather around the fire, sharing stories and strengthening community bonds while waiting for their meal. 9. Roasted grasshoppers. Long before protein bars lined store shelves, the ancient Maya and Aztec people of Mesoamerica had already mastered a crunchy, protein-packed snack: chapulanes or roasted grasshoppers. These abundant insects swarm through cornfields and grasslands during certain seasons, providing an easily harvested food source that required minimal processing. Children often helped with collection, gathering basketfuls of the jumping insects in the cool mornings when the creatures moved more slowly. The preparation was beautifully simple. Cooks would remove the wings and legs, then toast the insects on hot clay kamals until they turned a golden brown colour and developed a nutty aroma that filled the air around cooking fires. Some regions added lime juice, salt or ground chili peppers to enhance the flavour. These crunchy treats weren't just eaten for their pleasant taste. They packed a serious nutritional punch that modern nutritionists would appreciate. A handful of roasted grasshoppers contains more protein than the same amount of beef, plus valuable minerals like iron and calcium from their exoskeletons. For farming communities that couldn't always hunt large game, These insects provided crucial protein that kept people strong for fieldwork and other daily tasks. Modern visitors to Mexican markets can still find chapulines sold by the scoop, continuing this ancient food tradition that turns what many cultures consider pests into valuable nutrition. Gisonta chicha. In the highlands and valleys of South America, from Colombia to Chile, indigenous Andean peoples created a unique beverage that was both everyday refreshment and sacred offering. Chicha. Corn, not just any corn, but special varieties grown specifically for this purpose. The traditional preparation began with women chewing corn kernels and spitting them into large clay vessels. While this might sound strange to modern ears, this method served an important purpose. Human saliva contains enzymes that convert cornstarch into fermentable sugars. This chewed corn mash was then mixed with water and left to ferment naturally for several days, creating a slightly alcoholic drink with a tangy, sour flavour and cloudy appearance. Chicha was far more than just a beverage. It was central to community life and spiritual practices throughout the Andes, especially in the powerful Inca Empire. Workers building the massive stone structures would receive chicha as part of their payment, its carbohydrates providing much-needed energy for heavy labour. During planting and harvest festivals, everyone from children to elders would share in drinking chicha, though children typically received a less fermented version. The dregs left after straining, corn pulp still rich with nutrients, were never wasted, but instead used in stews or fed to animals. 11th, yucca cakes. The desert-dwelling tribes of the American Southwest turned to the spiky yucca plant when hunger came calling, finding treasure beneath its sharp exterior in the form of thick, starchy roots that could sustain families through the harshest times. Harvesting these roots was no easy task. It meant carefully digging around the plant to expose the underground portions while leaving enough root system intact so the yucca could regrow, showing the deep ecological understanding these people maintained even while seeking food. Once brought back to camp, women would scrub away the outer skin and grate the white flesh against rough stones, creating a wet pulp that released both moisture and a subtle sweetness. This pulp was then squeezed through woven cloths to remove bitter compounds, leaving behind a starchy mass that could be shaped by hand into flat cakes about the size of a palm. Cooked directly on hot stones surrounding the fire until golden and slightly crisp at the edges, these cakes developed a nutty flavour that paired perfectly with wild game or desert herbs, when available, though they often served as a meal all on their own during lean times. Children especially loved the cakes, which provided long-lasting energy for play or chores, and adults recognised them as reliable sustenance when desert hunting proved unsuccessful or seasonal plants weren't producing. 12th, maple sap porridge. When winter finally released its grip on the forests of the northeast, Abenaki, Mohawk and other woodland tribes celebrated the return of flowing maple sap, a clear, slightly sweet liquid that became the foundation for one of spring's first fresh meals after months of preserved foods. The gathering of this precious sap was a community effort that brought families together around the sugar maple groves they had tended for generations. Small diagonal cuts made in the trees allowed the sap to drip slowly into birch bark containers, or later wooden buckets. Unlike today's maple syrup production that boils the sap down to thick syrup, these early spring harvests often use the sap in its natural diluted state, gently heating it just enough to enhance its subtle sweetness, before stirring in whatever stored grains remained from winter supplies, usually ground corn from the previous fall's harvest or wild rice gathered from shallow lakes. The warm mixture thickened as it cooked over low fires, creating a sweet morning porridge that signaled the end of winter's hardship and the beginning of spring's promise. Families would gather around morning fires with wooden or clay bowls filled with this simple meal, sometimes adding nuts or dried berries that had been carefully stored through winter months. For children who had endured months of increasingly limited winter ration, this sweet porridge tasted like pure joy in a bowl, while adults recognised it as the perfect bridge food, arriving just as winter stores dwindled to dangerous levels, but before spring plants were ready for harvest. On Uchunju Pinole, across the vast regions of what is now Mexico and the American Southwest, the Aztec, Tarahumara, and numerous other indigenous groups transformed ordinary corn into an extraordinary superfood called pinole. The magic began with dry corn kernels carefully toasted over hot coals until they turned a deep golden brown and released a rich, nutty aroma that filled the air around cooking areas. These toasted kernels were then ground using stone tools into a fine powder that captured all the enhanced flavours created during the roasting process. The resulting meal could be carried easily in small pouches during hunting trips or long journeys, ready to be mixed with water to create an instant meal whenever hunger struck. Some tribes added wild honey, agave nectar, or foraged cinnamon when available, while others incorporated ground chia seeds for extra protein and fats that would sustain energy levels even longer. Runners among the Tarahumara, famous for their ability to cover incredible distances through rugged canyon country, would consume pinole mixed with just enough water to form a thick paste, eating small amounts throughout their journeys to maintain steady energy without the heavy feeling of a full meal. Mothers would often prepare special batches for children, adding extra sweeteners or seasonal berries to create a treat that was both nutritious and delicious. 14th, mesquite pod pudding. The harsh desert landscape of the American Southwest offered an unexpected sweet treat to Apache, Tohono O'odham, and other desert-dwelling peoples in the form of mesquite trees and their long, twisted seed pods that dangled like strange fingers from thorny branches during summer months. These pods, overlooked by many as merely animal fodder, became transformed through indigenous wisdom into a nutritious dessert-like pudding that helped communities thrive in one of North America's most challenging environments. When the pods turned a golden tan and became brittle in the summer heat, families would gather beneath the trees, spreading blankets to catch the bounty as they gently shook the branches, creating a rain of pods that could be collected by the basketful. Back at camp, these pods were ground using stone mortars and pestles, breaking down the tough outer covering and releasing the naturally sweet pulp inside, while careful grinding separated out the hard seeds. The resulting coarse flour had a surprisingly sweet, almost caramel-like flavour with hints of cinnamon. Nature's candy, hiding in plain sight among desert thorns. Mixed with just enough water to create a thick, sticky pudding, this mesquite meal required no additional sweeteners, yet satisfied the natural human craving for sweet flavours, while providing slow-release carbohydrates, protein, and essential minerals depleted by desert heat. During especially bountiful harvests, extra mesquite flour would be pressed into tight cakes and dried in the sun, creating long-lasting stores that could be broken into pieces and reconstituted months later when other food sources grew scarce. 15. Cornmeal and water cakes. From the eastern woodlands to the Great Plains and down through Mesoamerica, countless indigenous groups relied on a humble yet versatile food so basic it hardly seems like a recipe at all. Using corn dried from previous harvests and ground between stones until it reached the desired texture, women would combine the meal with just enough cool water to form a thick paste that held its shape when patted into flat discs about the size and thickness of a modern pancake. These cakes required no leavening, no waiting period, and minimal attention. Simply placed on hot stones surrounding the cooking fire, they would cook through in minutes, developing a slightly crisp exterior while remaining soft inside. In some regions, hot ashes were pushed aside and the cakes placed directly on the heated earth with more hot ashes piled on top, creating an earthen oven that cooked them evenly from all sides. The flavour was subtle but satisfying. The natural sweetness of corn transformed by heat into something more complex, especially when fresh corn was used and the cakes were eaten hot off the cooking stones. Families might eat these plain during lean times or use them as edible utensils to scoop up stews and sauces when food was more plentiful. Children often received smaller versions, sometimes with added berries pressed into the surface as a special treat. 16th, manioc flatbread. The cassava root, which grows abundantly in tropical regions, contains dangerous levels of cyanide compounds that must be removed before eating, requiring a processing method so precise it reveals the sophisticated food science knowledge these supposedly primitive cultures possessed. Women would begin by peeling and grating the large white roots against boards embedded with small stones or sharp chips, creating a wet pulp that they would then stuff into a remarkable invention called a tipiti, an expandable woven tube that, when stretched, would squeeze the toxic liquid from the pulp with tremendous force. This press pulp was then spread on large, flat ceramic surfaces over fire, where it baked into enormous circular flatbreads, often 2 to 3 feet across and just a 1/4 inch thick, with a relatively neutral flavour but a satisfying chewy texture that would remain edible for weeks, even in the humid rainforest. The bread could be eaten as is, torn into pieces to dip into stews, or even used as an edible wrapper for fish or meat. For journeys through the forest, hunters would roll the flatbread and carry it in woven bags, breaking off pieces whenever hunger struck. 17. Boiled plantains. Across the Caribbean islands and into parts of South America, the Taino and Arawak peoples embraced a simple food that required minimal preparation, yet delivered maximum nutrition. Unlike sweet bananas eaten when yellow or spotted, plantains were typically harvested while still firm and green, their starchy interiors perfect for cooking rather than eating raw. The preparation couldn't have been simpler. Women would collect bunches of plantains, strip away the thick peels using only their hands or basic tools, cut the firm white flesh into chunks, and drop them into clay pots of boiling water seasoned with nothing more than a pinch of ash or sea salt, if available. After about 15 minutes of gentle bubbling, the once hard pieces would transform into tender, satisfying morsels that could be eaten alone or, during better times, paired with fish, wild game, or tropical fruits. The beauty of this basic cooking method was its perfect match to the ingredients. Boiling highlighted the natural flavours of the plantain, while breaking down its starchy structure into something more digestible and energy-releasing. For children, these boiled plantains offered easy-to-chew nutrition that would sustain their growing bodies, while adults appreciated how quickly this meal could be prepared after long days tending gardens or fishing coastal waters. 18. Lichen soup. When winter stretched beyond endurance in the far northern regions of the world, Indigenous peoples like the Inuit, Sami, and northern Diane faced a desperate challenge, finding any form of plant nutrition when snow buried the landscape for months on end. Their solution came in the form of a survival food so basic and bitter that it was rarely the first choice, but often the last hope: lichen soup, made from rock tripe that clung to stones or reindeer moss that carpeted the tundra beneath the snow. Gathering these humble organisms required determined hands willing to scrape frozen lichens from rocks or dig through deep snow to find patches of reindeer moss, both difficult tasks in the bone-chilling cold of Arctic winters. Once gathered, the lichens required special preparation to become remotely palatable. Multiple soakings in fresh water or weak ash water help remove bitter compounds, though never entirely. The resulting material was then added to whatever cooking vessel was available, often animal stomach bags or birch containers in which hot stones were placed to bring the water to a simmer. The resulting soup was thin and carried a distinctly bitter, earthy flavour that no amount of preparation could entirely eliminate. Yet it provided crucial nutrients, when bodies were starving for anything green after months of only meat and fat. Sometimes dried berries, bits of fat, or small amounts of precious dried meat would be added to improve both flavour and nutrition, though in the harshest times, the lichen broth stood alone as the day's only meal. 19th. Fish in bark wraps. Along the rivers and coastal regions of the Pacific Northwest, tribes like the Salish, Haida and Chinook perfected a cooking method that turned fresh-caught salmon and other fish into a perfect meal using nothing but fire, cedar bark, and the natural bounty of their forest home. After a successful fishing expedition brought gleaming fish back to camp, cooks would clean their catch and then prepare one of nature's perfect cooking wrappers. Large sheets of cedar or maple bark carefully peeled from trees during the spring, when the sap made removal easier, then dried and stored for year-round cooking use. These flexible sheets would be briefly soaked in water to become pliable again before fresh fish, sometimes whole smaller specimens or carefully cut portions of larger salmon, were placed in the centre, along with whatever seasonal additions the forest provided: wild onions, tender fern heads, or flavourful herbs gathered from along stream banks. The bark was then folded into secure packages, sometimes tied with cedar root cordage if needed, before being nestled near, but not directly in, the hot coals of cooking fires, where they would steam the contents to perfection as the moisture from the soaked bark and the fish itself created a sealed environment that cooked everything through gentle heat. When unwrapped after about 20 minutes, the result was perfectly moist fish infused with the subtle flavour of cedar and whatever herbs were included, all the natural juices captured within the package rather than lost to the fire. Children eagerly awaited these aromatic packages, knowing the tender fish inside practically melted in their mouths, while adults appreciated how this method allowed them to cook without pots or other tools while travelling or at seasonal fishing camps away from their primary villages. 20. Seal blubber and berries. In the harsh Arctic world, where trees don't grow and plant foods become available for only a few brief weeks each year, the Inuit and other circumpolar peoples developed a diet that perfectly matched their extreme environment. One centered around the thick layers of fat from seals, walruses and whales, often paired with precious wild berries when seasons allowed. Hunting these marine mammals required extraordinary skill, patience, and specialized tools like harpoons with detachable heads. But the reward was a thick layer of fat that provided exactly what human bodies need to survive in freezing temperatures. Fresh blubber, sliced into small pieces about the size of sugar cubes, would be eaten raw to preserve all its nutritional properties. The rich, creamy texture melting slowly on the tongue and releasing energy that seemed to warm the body from within. When summer briefly transformed the tundra from white to green, families would gather wild blueberries, crowberries and cloudberries with careful hands, knowing these small fruits represented their only significant plant foods for the entire year. These precious berries weren't just for immediate eating. Many were mixed with rendered blubber and stored in seal stomachs or skin bags, creating a preserved mixture called akutak that would provide crucial vitamins throughout the long winter months ahead. Thanks for watching, and don't forget to like and subscribe to this channel for more interesting videos like this one.